On June 25th, a Moscow court sentenced Ilya Vasilyev to 8 years in prison. What was his crime? He posted a picture of a nativity scene on Facebook, and we need to talk about it. Greetings, Dharma mates, and welcome. It's your friendly neighborhood Zen priest here, and today we need to talk about something quite serious. I know we like to keep it light around here, but sometimes, well, we just have to grab the bull by the horn and say it as it is. As you just heard in the introduction, on June 25th, a Moscow court sentenced Ilya Vasilyev to 8 years in prison. So who was this guy, and why are we talking about him? Well, except for the fact that, of course, no one should be sentenced for posting anything on Facebook that isn't a direct threat or something like that. He was a Zen Buddhist teacher and director of the Moscow Zen Center. Vasilyev was born in 1973 and has the last past years been preparing for a Soto Zen ordination. And the Moscow Zen Center itself has been organized since 2010, if I remember correctly. Well, specifically, what was his crime then? He posted a nativity scene by a Ukrainian artist that depicted a nativity scene in the middle of a bombed out apartment building, basically. And this was, of course, seen as a condemnation of Russian missile strikes on Ukraine at that time. The post was in English and it was December 25th, so yeah, it was quite suitable. And he was basically asking for peace. And that's apparently illegal in Russia right now. The Russian authorities claimed that Vasilyev was doing this in order to spread false information about the operation in Ukraine, as they call it. Yeah, for those of you playing along at home, it was a violation of Criminal Code Article 207.3. I'm sure we've all read that. Vasilyev himself, of course, claims that it was call for peace, like I said before, and it was driven not by hatred, but by compassion, sprung from his dedicated Buddhist practice. In court, he claimed that his post was directly connected to Buddhism, as Buddhism teaches that it's wrong that people die, quite simply, especially in violent ways, which I try to stay objective here, but I'd say, yeah, that's true. Since his arrest in June, he's been held at insert random prison that I can't pronounce here, and he's even been held in solitary confinement. But not only that, he's also been denied service by a Buddhist priest or other form of, clergyman. Of course, because reasons. However, according to his lawyer, he is still practicing the Dharma, meditating, reading scriptures, and all of that. So perhaps he can see his solitary confinement as some sort of involuntary sesshin or something like that. I don't know. Now, we're of course talking about this because this specific person is a Zen Buddhist practitioner and a teacher. But that's not the only reason we should be talking about this topic. And Vasilyev isn't the only religious leader who's been taken into custody. Pastor Nikolai Romanchik, he was also imprisoned last year for preaching a message of peace. Preaching the teachings of Jesus is apparently illegal now as well. I wonder which country that could become illegal in soon enough. And then we have preacher Edmund Sharab, who was arrested for promoting terrorism and a bunch of other, frankly, silly stuff. He was on social media asking for peace as well. So apparently, being on social media and talking about wanting peace and a stop to the hostilities, that's where the Russians put down their boots and say, no, this is it. Off to jail. Like I mentioned before, all of this is possible due to a new law that was introduced by Putin in 2022 that basically shuts down any opposition to Russian expansionism. And this, of course, goes beyond, being a Buddhist or a Christian or a priest or a pastor or a teacher or whatever. This is about any space for peaceful dissent against the Russian government today. And for those of us who practice Buddhism in particular, right speech is very important as it's part of the Eightfold Path. And right speech, more often than not, promotes peace over violence in any situation. This is exactly what Vasilyev was doing, according to the information I've seen. And so were the two other preachers. And apparently, that's illegal now. Doing so can land you in jail for 8 years. The Russian jails aren't the most comfortable. Or so I heard. I haven't been in one myself. And I hope I never will. And I hope you never will, either. So there it is, we've talked about it. Now, what can we do? Well, I do not know a lot about the Russian legal system. But what I do know is that you're not allowed to receive letters. in a foreign language, that being non-Russian, while sitting in prison in Russia. But if you want to send something to Vasilyev and you do not speak Russian, there's this initiative called Right to Russia. I will put their links below in the description. That allows you to send a letter to them in any language that they are familiar with, and they will translate it to Russian, and either they will send it back to you along with instructions on how you can send your letter to him. What else can we do just in general? Well, we can continue to put the focus on it, like we're doing right now. We can deny it being a solely, local, national Russian thing and make it something that's known globally. So that's why I'm making this video. That's why I'm asking you to share this video if you want to, or share any of the articles written about this case. I'll link to those below as well. And if anything, we can continue to practice ourselves. We can do the Zazen when they can't. But you can always do Zazen. It's basically impossible to not be able to do Zazen. But you get the point, And I know what you're thinking. You might be thinking, hey, this is Russia. What do you expect? But something like that could never happen in my country. Not in, for example, let's say Sweden, where I'm from. The land of IKEA, cinnamon buns, and fika and all of that. That could never happen here. I'd love to agree with you, but we are seeing what I would cautiously like to call a dismantling of certain democratic rights here as well. For example, it's now illegal in Sweden to insult the self-esteem or dignity of a public official. What does that mean? If you choose to, for example, to express yourself in a colorful Swedish way to a police officer who may or may not be doing their proper job, you might end up in prison for that. Or at least receive a hefty fine. Because apparently, the fragile feelings of people in uniform must be preserved at all costs, even if yours aren't. And look, I get it. I've worked as a public official myself. I've been in hostile situations with people who use less than proper language, let's say. And I've worked night times at hotels. And that, of course, service people aren't covered by this new law, despite them probably being exposed to this kind of indecency by other people more than police officers, let's say. Well, maybe not more than police officers, but at least more than, public, local economy people. Yeah, that's a term. That's a job title, economy person. And of course, direct threats and such should be illegal, and they already are. Nothing changes with this law. They are already illegal. But are we really going to legislate around hurt feelings now? Is that the kind of society we want to be? And speaking of slippery slopes, and getting a bit slippery just in general, you'll get that pun later on, it is now illegal in Sweden to order commissioned adult entertainment from adult entertainers. For example, you're not allowed to contact someone on OnlyFans and tell them, hey, I'd like you to do this and that, and then send a video of you doing this and that to me. You can, of course, still buy a regular porno. It's no problem. To adult consenting people, with agency, no. Don't let them send nude pictures to each other for a few bucks. No, that's dangerous. But the big corporations, yeah, sure, let's allow them to make porno. That's no problem. And look, I'm not here to champion the rights of the adult entertainment industry. In general, I personally would say that they do more harm than good. Maybe I'll make a video on why I believe that my morals and ethics shouldn't be the foundation for the law. Let me know if you want to see me go on a tangent about that sometime. But when the line between moral discomfort and state intervention becomes too blurred, then we as Buddhists, and frankly anyone and everyone, should start paying attention, if you aren't already. And me being a Zen Buddhist priest who believe that trying to separate religion from politics is basically impossible. Freedom of belief, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, that's vital. I mean, if we didn't have that in Sweden, if we just stuck with our Protestant faith all along, I wouldn't be allowed to do this. In fact, as some of you may know, I've been studying to become a teacher, and if this was way back in the 50s when my dad was young, I wouldn't be allowed to be a teacher because I wasn't a Christian. And that's why I believe these rights to be fundamental for any spiritual practice. This goes beyond OnlyFans, and it goes beyond what you're allowed to say to Putin and whatever. It's fundamental for your own spiritual practice. Without freedom of speech, freedom of expression, well, you have nothing. And not the nothingness that people who can't understand the difference between emptiness and nothingness try to joke about on Buddhist humor forums. Basically, we cannot awaken if we're not allowed to express ourselves. We cannot practice radical compassion if the state is allowed to tell us which feelings are valid and which feelings are not. So while Russia's actions are extreme, of course, they're not that far off from what's happening in the West right now. You know, whether you look at Europe or the United States, for example. I don't really know what's going on in Africa. I'll be honest about that. That's sort of a blind spot for me. And Greenland. What's up with Greenland? I don't know. Why does Trump want Greenland? I don't know. What starts as protecting dignity can easily become silencing dissent. And what begins as guarding morality, well, that can quite often turn into criminalizing non-conformity. It always starts small. It always sounds reasonable at first, until it doesn't. So my invitation to you, Dharma mates, are that you stay awake. Not just on your cushion, not just, in your sendo, but in your culture, right where you are right now. Do not separate your spiritual practice from whatever you're doing in the morning or evening or in the afternoon or whatever. Everything is part of your practice. So speak up, gently, firmly, with compassion, just like Vasiliev did, allegedly, and just as the Dharma calls us to do. Now, as always, if you found this video interesting or entertaining or, just a bit of a distraction, please leave a like, subscribe, and comment below. Even if you don't like my channel, please do so, because at least it will tell the algorithm that you want more Buddhist and spiritual content. So with that said, please take care of each other, stay vigilant, and ground your practice in compassion, insight, and wisdom. Until next time, take care.